Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we'll be continuing our discussion of Masonry Isn't Dying, It's Refining by Robert H. Johnson.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have our same cast of three-quarters of us that we had at last episode. I'm Very Worshipful Brother Matthew Appel, a member of Mill Creek Lodge number 243 here in Montlake Terrace, Washington. We have Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham from Penticton number 147 in Penticton, British Columbia. And Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth, who's a member of King Solomon number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And I would encourage you, if this is your first episode, to go back and listen to the previous episode, because we started talking about this article by Robert H. Johnson, which is on the Midnight Freemasons blog, and is, as we said earlier, is brief but meaty. And it's got a lot of interesting stuff in there. And David, before the last episode ended, you were about to say something pithy, and I cut you off in my usual manner. So, did you have a pithy comment to make?
I don't know how pithy it was. Now I'm not exactly sure where we. Oh, what was it? Yeah, no, we were talking about. How did I frame it in our blue room? Now I can't remember how we framed it. Was it that membership? I don't know. I'm gonna have to cut this piece out because now I don't remember. I went out to get a drink and now I don't remember.
Between your inability to remember and my inability to stop sneezing, this is quite the episode we got going here.
I am totally drawing a blank. I don't know why. You were talking about Shriners.
Yeah, we hit up on the Shriners.
How, was it that it was? Oh, because the article you had pulled up about the 1800s and how the same problems exist all the time.
Okay, so David, in our last episode, you were about to say something pithy about the article that we were reading before I cut you off. Do you happen to recall what that was? We should make a bloopers episode of this.
That's going to be a break. We can just continue. I'll figure out how to meld it together. So yeah, like we were talking about in the last episode, I was hoping it would be fun to know exactly what was really happening in the late 1800s and early 1900s, because in the article that you provided about Mackey saying that there was a lack of education in the lodges, and so I was saying, isn't it interesting? It's kind of like history that they usually only write down the good stuff. And so what was really happening in the 1800s and the 20s and the 40s and the 50s? And do we really, really know what was happening? We only know what they wrote down. And some of the guys, maybe in the 40s and 50s, are still around, but not many of them are left anymore. So we really don't know what may have been happening during those times. And so is there a way to know? Maybe Masonic lodges have always been social lodges, and we think we don't want them to be social lodges, and so we make up that idea. And then in the blue room, Jarrod I didn't remember what we were saying about the Shriners.
Well, we know that lodges were serious because the reason that the shrine was formed, to my recollection, was because they wanted a more social. They wanted to be less serious and more social. So the shrine was formed for that purpose. And as I said, we can go back and look at that. We can look at the appendant bodies and concordant bodies that are created and when they're created and their purpose for when they're created, and get an idea of what lodge was sort of like. Because if you felt it was necessary enough to form a new organization just to have fun in lodge, then obviously lodge was a serious thing in the late 19th century, because when shrine was formed, late 19th century. And of course, as I said, and they had the reputation of being sort of the party. Their conventions tended to get a bit rowdy and raucous. And to my understanding, that the shrine hospitals came out of the fact that they needed sort of an image upgrade because they were having a hard time finding places to have their conventions, and that they needed a more of a purpose than just getting together and partying. But please, no Shriners get mad at me if I'm mistaken. I'm just saying what I think, if I recall correctly from my readings.
Please comment below.
but you can trace. So we can sort of trace like what lodges were like, just from those kind of occurrences.
Yeah, so if it's interesting to think though, and Matt made a comment last time about how there was likely an influx, or maybe it was you, Jarrod, that was likely an influx from the Civil War. I think it was Matt. After the Civil War, there was an influx of membership as well, and so maybe these ideas follow the influx of Masons, and so which would have followed right along the lines of when the Shrine was formed, and so maybe there is a serious lodge level membership, and then as the influx of Masons come in, and we say, wait a minute, this is too serious, we need to have an outlet for that, and they formed, in this case, they actually formed a whole new organization, Shriners and other pendant groups, to satisfy that social aspect. And then when it became more serious during the Great Depression of the times, they said, hey, we got to, that downflow may have just been a side effect and not really a dive to seriousness, if you will, or a dive to traditional Masonry. But it couldn't find itself because before it bottomed out, if you will, then we had the influx from World War II in that era. At least, again, these are all the United States numbers, specifically from the graphs we showed last week, and you find an MSA. But maybe, as we've kind of talked about, we've kind of come around the whole circle. Maybe it is a dive to serious Masonry or dive to traditional Masonry. But what is tradition? How far back do we need to go to find what is tradition?
1717.
Boy, that's pretty late in the game. Back to the Templars, back to the construction of the pyramids. No.
Well, I was thinking about that today. Like, we like to wear suits in lodges, and we recommend that suits are an idea. So, but the idea of a suit was invented, if you will, and so at what point did that change and become a suit? I mean, there was different. We talked about the idea of meeting in taverns. And tavern in our language is not the same as the word tavern before. It's more of a social event. And so if I can imagine Masons meeting in a community place in the top of a restaurant, if you will, or tavern, a social gathering place, what would they be wearing? Would they dress up to go to that event, do you think? Or would it have just been the work clothes of the day?
Well, okay, so what you have to understand is that
for those of you who aren't watching the video of this, Jarrod is right now rubbing his hands together in glee before he.
Well, no, because fashion history is another sort of weird passion of mine. You have to understand that North Americans North Americans dress a lot more casually than anywhere. Like, we've always been a very more casual dressing society, but the idea of a suit of clothes, I mean, in the early Grand Lodge era, they would have worn what we would probably think of as a suit of clothes. It would have worn breeches and a waistcoat and a jacket and a cravat or what, and as it progressed, and so when you get into even the 19th century, like with the frock coats and everything, there was always, like, a man always wore a suit of clothes.
And so that I would agree, probably at a NM communication or at a large event, but at a regular meeting,
yes,
if you met every Monday night or every Friday night or whatever, would he always wear that?
Okay, because you have to remember that. Okay, so the people that were the main members of Freemasonry were the higher echelons of society.
Yeah.
That what you wore, especially in British society, the time of day dictated what you wore.
Yeah.
So, like, the idea of, like, we think of the tuxedo as being the epitome of formal attire now, but in the late 19th century, when it was first introduced, it was actually considered too casual to wear to dinner. So you get an idea of what people were wearing as casual clothes. So going to, people that went to lodge would have worn a suit, like as we would know it today, a tailored coat and pants.
And it was tuxedo was evening wear too. If you had a meeting during the day that was a formal event during the day, you would not have worn a tuxedo. You would have worn whatever, a cutaway and that sort of stuff.
Oh God, it drives me crazy nowadays that people wear tuxedos before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's a topic for another show.
You should be holding a drink when you say that, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, and where are we going with this?
I think David's point was that back when Masonry was formed, things were, if we want to go back to traditional Masonry, should we all be wearing breeches and waistcoats and et cetera?
Yeah. What's the marker or the timeline for traditional Masonry, and what are we trying to get back to? Yes, maybe they met. Maybe I'll give you that. Maybe they dressed nicer. I'm sure they dressed nicer. And so things have been relaxed to a great extent. But what were they really meeting and talking about? I think we were delved into a little bit in the last show. Were they really talking about the seriousness? Matt alluded to the idea of the education. He wanted to talk about the education piece and what was Masonry offering as far as education, and was it really the philosophies, and really was it mentorship and those kind of things, or was it the guys that were already at that level talking amongst themselves? Did they really bring in, and I have a note later, we might get to it either in this show or another one, about the last article. The guy talked about his dad being a sausage maker, and I have a note that says, well, is it unfair to think that the sausage maker can't become a better man through Masonry? And that maybe is a whole different topic. So what were they really talking about in the early 1800s or mid 1800s or late 1800s or early 1900s? Again, like you said, what are we driving back towards?
I would, and I know I always say this, is that look to your ritual, because that's what we're going back to. That's what we need to go back to, is when a period when ritual was the center of a Masonic meeting, because in our ritual is the lessons that we're trying to learn, and that anything that, so this will come up later because we all know that what I've chosen is the next article, but yeah, so that's what I think is because that's where we've gotten away from what I consider the essence of Freemasonry, is that we don't pay attention to the lessons that are expounded in our 3 degrees and the ritual around it.
So some kind of like what we're doing this season, right? We're looking at maybe not the ritual specifically, but articles related to the ritual or to the ideas of who we are and what we maybe could be or should be, and discussing those. So what we can maybe suppose was in the lodge in 1880 or a lodge in 1910 was that, yeah, maybe they dressed a little more formally, which we might like to do, and we would hope they would maybe could either conduct a degree or exemplify a degree, and then have a discussion about what happened during that degree, and through those allegories men could improve themselves. But weren't we looking at that those that were joining Masonry at the time were already the higher quality men, so we weren't allowing this, maybe they weren't allowing the sausage maker in that, and so did they really need to improve, right? I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, was if you're already, not to use Masonic terms, but if you're already a perfect bachelor, how much more perfect can you get? If that's, they didn't call themselves perfect, they called themselves imperfect. So I'm trying to, what was the reason they were getting there? Why did they need Masonry if they were already good?
Well, I think I think you might be confusing social status with, I don't want to say imperfection, but
inherent goodness.
Inherent goodness, and I think that's
Okay.
where Freemasonry comes in. Is that, and I think, I mean, to be sure, a lot of the early lodges were a social, there was an organization to join because there were people that you wanted to associate with. But it was also the idea that I believe that people weren't, that you even though you were of a higher social status, there was still work you needed to do to improve yourself and the world around you. And so the best way to do that would be to gather with like-minded people and discuss topics that, would, you may not necessarily agree with, but you can at least understand it better and form a better opinion.
I would argue, and this is just my opinion, but I would argue that what we don't need is to return to tradition. What we need is to figure out the essence of Masonry, figure out what the point is of this whole thing, and go there. Whether or not it's what they talked about in 1717 or in 1920 or in 1853 or whatever is kind of immaterial in my mind. If we want Masonry to succeed and to make good men better and to be a group that people want to join, what we need to do is pursue that essence of Masonry, like you were talking about, Jarrod. Even if it's not, so there's going to be a bit of heresy, but even if it's not through the ritual, even if it's through some other mechanism or the ritual adjacent or whatever, making us better individuals is an important goal that I think is more important than whatever the tradition was of where we met or how we dressed or that's kind of my, so to put a soapbox on top of my soapbox, that's kind of my problem with the traditional observance movement. Is I think it's great the essence of Masonry that they are shooting for is really cool and great, but I think that some of the trappings are kind of not necessarily necessary. I probably just ticked off a lot of brothers, but there you go. It's what we need to do is figure out what we want Masonry to be and go there. And tradition is nice and all, and I'm not saying we should, chuck the baby with the bathwater, but that's not the important part.
And I think the idea too that there's kind of two camps in that TO, traditional observance idea, in that there's the true traditional observers, and they're in a further camp, and then there's those that like the concepts of observance and being more focused on Masonry and the elements, like Jarrod said, maybe the ritual. And I would agree that, I think hopefully you all would agree that, yeah, if you dress up, wear a tux or wear a suit, you're going to feel better about yourself. You're going to be in a better mind state usually, unless it's there also could be a barrier, like, gosh, I can't afford a suit, or I can't tie this tie. There could be some barriers, but then isn't it our opportunity to help that brother and say, hey, let me help you with that tie, or hey, I went over to this store and got this coat, or help them through the process of becoming a better man, because we don't have the aristocratic levels anymore, where you were kind of taught those as you were young, growing up, how to dress or how you should be or shouldn't act. And so I think there's some elements of those things. So when you get a group of guys together that have not only are dressed in a certain way and have a certain mindset, then I would agree, like Jarrod said, that yeah, they're going to get together and talk about things that they need to talk about and to improve themselves. And I'll argue with Matt that maybe it is through the concept of the ritual, the words of the ritual, but that gives us at least a basis to talk about things. And yes, then it could then explore, just like the show. We could go off in tangents and explore other ideas. But if you have nothing else to start with, at least start with the ritual and then say, what do you think about that? And just the other day, I did an exercise with my mom, of all people. We don't normally have very philosophical conversations when I go to visit, but I'm going to call her out a little bit, that she says, well, every day is a miracle, David. Everything's a miracle. When you wake up in the morning, it's a miracle. And I said, those are really wonderful things, Mother, but is it really a miracle? I said, what does the word miracle mean? And we kind of got this discussion, and then she got up out of her chair and walked behind me and came around the corner with a dictionary. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Mom has never done that before. So she sat down and she looked at the word miracle, and we got the definition of what the word miracle was. And there was several words in there, and I said, that's a great definition. Now, this is what we do, something I've been taught through Masonry and through this show. I'll be honest with you guys, it's taught me to do more in-depth research. So now let's look up those words of the definition so we can learn what the words of the definition mean. And so then I expanded the definition. So then we got a real definition of the word miracle means, because we had the definition of the definition. And I said, if you really want to go crazy, you could go one step further and look up some of those words of that definition to really understand what people are meaning by it. And so as she read that, she goes, oh, well, maybe it's not a miracle. I said, but it is a blessing. It is a gift. There's lots of other words, hundreds of other words that you could describe those experiences in your life, waking up in the morning or things happening. Miracle is a fascinating thing. It's an important thing, but the definition of miracle isn't that. So maybe the ritual and Masonry are the foundational elements of what we can use then to learn more about life and learn about ourselves and each other.
I'm sorry, that was entirely too profound. We have to edit that out later. No, I agree. Yeah, exactly. If we want this organization to be important and important in men's lives, then that's what we need. Not, yeah. I'm floundering. I'll admit it. So,
flatter me with floundering, Matt.
So to get back to the article a bit, one of the interesting things that he talks about is that the current, and we talked about this again briefly in the last episode, the current Grand Lodge and Lodge structure is established for the millions of men that we no longer have. That when there were, we could snap your fingers and find 15 guys to man the finance committee. Then, it was great that we had a finance committee and a fundraising committee and a whatever committee and a whatever committee. But nowadays, the fact that we don't have that many people, maybe we need to right size, as Jarrod said, and figure out where we need to be in that aspect of both Grand Lodge and your lodges. Did you guys have further thoughts about that? Or I've really found that interesting, because I've said it before, actually, in the context of my church, that our church does things that we used to do, and it was cool. It was great when we did them when we had 8 times as many members and we could throw people at the problem. But nowadays, maybe we need to go, maybe we need to let that go. Maybe that's not the thing for us.
Yeah, there are. And actually, there's a prime example up here in British Columbia. Is we had what was called the Cancer Car program, which was run by Masons for people, we free rides to the hospital for people who couldn't get there. And because of our membership, the Grand Lodge recently entered into an agreement with the Canadian Cancer Society to take that over for us, because it's a large scale project that we just don't have the membership to do. And quite honestly, we shouldn't be in this business to begin with, because there are organizations that are better set up to do it for us. And so, and admittedly, there's been some backlash about that, but it's a step. It's looking at the various levels and projects that we've taken on. But back when we had 5 times as many members as we do now, and you couldn't swing a cat in a crowd without hitting a Mason or 2. And now, we need to look at, do we actually have the ability to properly manage these, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Manage these, not organizations, but manage these projects in a manner that is actually beneficial to the membership, and not just, and not just an albatross around our necks.
Longtime listeners will recall that we've had actually had the couple of people from the Cancer Car program on the show. That was a couple of years ago, right when I first joined, I think. So it's been a little while. But go back and listen to all the old episodes. It's in there.
It's one of those neat programs that, like you said, you can't sustain it. And if you had to start today again, if the 3 of us were getting together and start a lodge or start a new Grand Lodge, is that the first thing we would do? No, we probably would focus on a ritual and focus on, again, maybe talk for another show, but I wrote another resolution while we were sitting in there in a communication about the lodge inspection. We've been talking about the idea of lodge inspections, how much I am in love with that. And so I finally wrote a resolution about it, and we'll present it. But, what if was the formation of a lodge so that we could have charitable outreach for communities? It's a great thing. And I think he alludes to that in this article, that having charities and doing charitable work is important, but is that the focus of a lodge? and Freemasonry.
Exactly.
I tell people when they join all the time that Masonry isn't a charity, but Masonry should make you as an individual want to be more charitable and to go out and do good things. And I think we lose sight of that a lot. We end up thinking that we're a charity. So sorry, Jarrod, you had unmuted there for a second. Did you have something else to say? Or?
No, I was just going to agree with that large scale charitable projects are not something that we are designed. We are structured for, and we should get out of them right now. Like, yeah, it shouldn't be the focus. It sometimes seems like it is, but it shouldn't be. That, you know, we should be educating people so that they feel that they want to go out and do that, but it shouldn't be what people join Freemasonry to do to begin with. Because there are, quite honestly, once again, there's organizations out there that are way better organized and structured to do that.
All right. So another idea from this article, although actually we're running out of time, so we'll talk about that idea later. Hopefully there'll be a third episode where we can talk about some more of these things. Yeah. So on that note, if this is a meaty topic, and if anybody has any thoughts, please do drop them in our various chat places and Facebook or wherever, and we're happy to discuss them and talk about them on a future episode even. And with that, on behalf of Jarrod and David and the absent Steve and myself, thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast. Goodbye.